The study of the individual. Because psychology has historically dealt with general laws and characteristics that people have in common, Allport repeatedly advocated the development and use of research methods that study the individual. To balance the predominant normative or group approach, he suggested that psychologists employ methods that study the motivational and stylistic behaviors of one person. Morphogenic science. Early in his writings, Allport distinguished between two scientific approaches, the nomothetic, which seeks general laws, and the ideographic, which refers to that which is peculiar to the single case. Because the term ideographic was so often misused, misunderstood, and misspelled, being confused with ideographic, or the representation of ideas by graphic symbols. Allport abandoned the term in his later writings and spoke of morphogenic procedures. Both ideographic and morphogenic pertain to the individual, but ideographic does not suggest structure or pattern. In contrast, morphogenic refers to patterned properties of the whole organism and allows for intraperson comparisons. The pattern or structure of one's personal dispositions are important. For example, Tyrone may be intelligent, introverted, and strongly motivated by achievement needs, but the unique manner in which his intelligence is related to his introversion and each to his achievement needs forms a structured pattern. These individual patterns are the subject matter of morphogenic science. What are the methods of morphogenic psychology? Allport listed many, some completely morphogenic, some partly so. Examples of wholly morphogenic, first-person methods are verbatim recordings, interviews, dreams, confessions, diaries, letters, some questionnaires, expressive documents, projective documents, literary works, art forms, automatic writings, doodles, handshakes, voice patterns, body gestures, handwriting, gait, and autobiographies. When Allport met Hans Eysenck, the famous British factor analyst and believer in nomothetic science, he told Eysenck that one day he, Eysenck, would write his autobiography. Eventually, Eysenck did indeed publish an autobiography in which he admitted that Allport was right and that morphogenic methods such as one's description of one's own life and work can have validity. Semi-morphogenic approaches include self-rating scales, such as the adjective checklist, standardized tests in which people are compared to themselves rather than a norm group, the Allport-Vernon-Lindsay study of values, and the Q-sort technique of Stevenson, which we discussed in Chapter 11. Consistent with common sense, but contrary to many psychologists, Allport was willing to accept at face value the self-disclosure statements of most participants in a study. A psychologist who wishes to learn the personal dynamics of people needs simply to ask them what they think of themselves. Answers to direct questions should be accepted as valid unless the person is a young child, psychotic, or extremely defensive. Allport said that too often we fail to consult the richest of all sources of data, namely, the subject's own self-knowledge. The Diaries of Marianne Taylor. During the late 1930s, Allport and his wife Ada became acquainted with an extremely rich source of personal data about a woman whom they called Marianne Taylor. The core of this data was nearly a lifetime of diaries, but personal information on Marianne Taylor also included descriptions of her by her mother, her younger sister, her favorite teacher, two of her friends, and a neighbor, as well as notes in a baby book, school records, scores on several psychological tests, autobiographical material, and two personal meetings with Ada Allport. Nicole Barenbaum has put together a brief account of Marianne Taylor's life. Taylor was born in 1902 in Illinois, moved to California with her parents and younger sister in 1908, and began writing to her diary in 1911. Soon after her 13th birthday, her diary entries became more personal, including fantasies and secret feelings. She eventually graduated from college, earned a master's degree, and became a psychology and biology teacher. She married at age 31 but had no children. Although a wealth of personal documents on Marianne Taylor became available to Ada and Gordon Allport, the Allports chose not to publish an account of her story. Barenbaum offered some possible reasons for this, but due to major gaps in the correspondence between Marianne Taylor and Ada Allport, it is now impossible to know for certain why the Allports did not publish this case history. Their work with Marianne Taylor probably helped them organize and publish a second case, the story of Jenny Gove Masterson, another pseudonym. Letters from Jenny. Allport's morphogenic approach to the study of lives is best illustrated in his famous Letters from Jenny. These letters reveal the story of an older woman and her intense love-hate feelings toward her son Ross. Between March 1926, when she was 58, and October 1937, when she died, Jenny wrote a series of 301 letters to Ross's former college roommate, Glenn, and his wife Isabel, who almost certainly were Gordon and Ada Allport. Allport originally published parts of these letters anonymously and then later published them in more detail under his own name. Born in Ireland of Protestant parents in 1868, Jenny was the oldest in a family of 7 children that included 5 sisters and a brother. When she was 5 years old, the family moved to Canada, and when she was 18, her father died and Jenny was forced to quit school and go to work to help support her family. After 9 years, her brothers and sisters became self-supporting, and Jenny, who had always been considered rebellious, scandalized her family by marrying a divorced man, a decision that further alienated her from her conservatively religious family. After only 2 years of marriage, Jenny's husband died. A month or so later, her son Ross was born. This was 1897, the same year Gordon Allport, Ross's future college roommate, was born. The next 17 years were somewhat contented ones for Jenny. Her world revolved around her son, and she worked hard to ensure that he had everything he wanted. She told Ross that, aside from art, the world was a miserable place and that it was her duty to sacrifice for him because she was responsible for his existence. When Ross moved away to attend college, Jenny continued to scrimp in order to pay all his bills. As Ross began to be interested in women, the idyllic mother-son relationship came to an end. The two quarreled often and bitterly over his female friends. Jenny referred to each of them as prostitutes or whores, including the woman Ross married. With that marriage, Jenny and Ross became temporarily estranged. At about that same time, Jenny began an 11- and 12-year correspondence with Glenn and Isabel, Gordon and Ada, in which she revealed much about both her life and her personality. The early letters showed that she was deeply concerned with money, death, and Ross. She felt that Ross was ungrateful and that he had abandoned her for another woman, and a prostitute, at that she continued her bitterness toward him until he and his wife were divorced. She then moved into the apartment next to Ross's, and for a short time Jenny was happy. But soon Ross was seeing other women, and Jenny inevitably found something wrong with each. Her letters were filled again with animosity for Ross, a suspicious and cynical attitude toward others, and a morbid yet dramatic approach to life. 3 years into the correspondence, Ross suddenly died. After his death, Jenny's letters expressed a somewhat more favorable attitude toward her son. Now she did not have to share him with anyone. Now he was safe, no more prostitutes. For the next 8 years, Jenny continued writing to Glenn and Isabel, and they usually answered her. However, they served mostly as neutral listeners and not as advisors or confidants. Jenny continued to be overly concerned with death and money. She increasingly blamed others for her misery and intensified her suspicions and hostility toward her caregivers. After Jenny died, Isabel, Ada, commented that, in the end, Jenny was the same, only more so. These letters represent an unusually rich source of morphogenic material. For years, they were subjected to close analysis and study by Allport and his students, who sought to build the structure of a single personality by identifying personal dispositions that were central to that person. Allport and his students used 3 techniques to look at Jenny's personality. First, Alfred Baldwin developed a technique called personal structure analysis to analyze approximately 1/3 of the letters. To analyze Jenny's personal structure, Baldwin used 2 strictly morphogenic procedures, frequency and contiguity, for gathering evidence. The first simply involves a notation of the frequency with which an item appears in the case material. For example, how often did Jenny mention Ross, or money, or herself? Contiguity refers to the proximity of two items in the letters. How often did the category Ross unfavorable occur in close correspondence with herself self-sacrificing? Freud and other psychoanalysts intuitively used this technique of contiguity to discover an association between two items in a patient's unconscious mind. Baldwin, however, refined it by determining statistically those correspondences that occur more frequently than could be expected by chance alone. Using the personal structure analysis, Baldwin identified three clusters of categories in Jenny's letters. The first related to Ross, women, the past, and herself self-sacrificing. The second dealt with Jenny's search for a job, and the third cluster revolved around her attitude toward money and death. The three clusters are independent of each other even though a single topic, such as money, may appear in all three clusters. Second, Jeffrey Page used a factor analysis to extract primary personal dispositions revealed by Jenny's letters. In all, Page identified 8 factors: aggression, possessiveness, affiliation, autonomy, familial acceptance, sexuality, sentience, and martyrdom. Page's study is interesting because he identified 8 factors, a number that corresponds very well with the number of central dispositions 5 to 10. That Allport had earlier hypothesized would be found in most people. The third method of studying Jenny's letters was a common sense technique used by Allport. His results are quite similar to those of Baldwin and Page. Allport asked 36 judges to list what they thought were Jenny's essential characteristics. They recorded 198 descriptive adjectives, many of which were synonymous and overlapping. Allport then grouped the terms into 8 clusters: 1. Quarrelsome suspicious, 2. Self-centered, possessive, 3. Independent autonomous, 4. Dramatic intense, 5. Aesthetic artistic, 6. Aggressive, 7. Cynical morbid, and 8. Sentimental. Comparing this common sense, clinical approach with Page's factorial study, Allport presented some interesting parallels. Through Jenny's letters, then, we find that she possessed about 8 central traits that characterized the last 12 years of her life, if not her entire life. She was aggressive, suspicious, possessive, aesthetic, sentimental, morbid, dramatic, and self-centered. These central dispositions were sufficiently powerful that she was described in similar terms both by Isabel, Ada Allport, who knew her well, and by independent researchers, who studied her letters. The close agreement between Allport's common sense clinical approach and Page's factor analytic method does not prove the validity of either. It does, however, indicate the feasibility of morphogenic studies. Psychologists can analyze one person and identify central dispositions with consistency even when they use different procedures.